welcome to Sober Dad Crew, the podcast where we talk about all things dad, sobriety, recovery, parenting, music, tattoos, and more. For more information or to get in touch, visit soberdadcrew.com. I met my guest Ben Riker at the Alcohol and Drug Council of Tompkins County annual Recovery Rocks event in Ithaca, New York. Ben and I both shared our recovery stories. While our stories and paths differ, there's a similar thread of recovery and parenting. Ben is a father of two, a person in recovery, and a passionate advocate for data-driven, evidence-based policy surrounding education, treatment, and recovery from substance use disorders. His professional background includes all aspects of organizational, peer professional integration and programming, including training, coaching, and supervision, as well as community and professional education and outreach. Ben is a 4 New York best practice trainer, a member of the ASAP-NYCB Trainer Registry, and serves on the Partnership to End Addiction's First Research Network National Advisory Board, Faces and Voices of Recovery's National Public Policy Committee, and the New York Association of Substance Abuse Providers Harm Reduction Committee. Ben, welcome to Sober Dad Crew.
Thanks, Stephen. I'm psyched to get the invite.
Yeah, no, this was great. And, like I said, we just really didn't even talk that much at the event, but we both shared our stories there. And I was like, I got to talk to Ben because I think we have a lot of things in common, but also some stuff that's, our paths are a little different. So I'm just going to jump in with some easy stuff. How many kids do you have?
I have two kids. I have a 14-year-old son and a 7-year-old daughter, Jonah and Alice.
Awesome. Now, did you always want to be a dad?
Short answer is no. I had sort of a bumpy home life, bumpy relationship with my father, which still that bumpy relationship still exists. I had some men in my mom's life as a kid that, again, it was, sort of rocky relationships, which isn't the case now. My mom is happily married to a wonderful, wonderful man. The short answer is no. I think during active use, like many of us, I was self-centered in the extreme, and the thought of parenting, to me was really kind of the culmination of all my nightmares. How things have changed, because I love being a dad, and I'm a good dad. But long answer to short is no.
So did you get sober after you had kids or before?
So before, my son was about 7 when I got sober, and my daughter was less than 6 months old. Yeah.
Yeah, I think my son was about the same age, and then my daughter would be 3. So they have very different experiences with us as parents, right? Because one doesn't really know anything but the sober parent, and the other one knows all the madness, all the impatience, all that stuff that came with, not being a healthy parent at the time.
Sure. And, the absence on occasion, the absence on, at dinner time a lot. I have these memories of my son, like, knowing at 4 or 5, like, to reach to the bottom of the cooler for like the Blue Mountains on the Coors can kind of thing, when dad wanted a beer, which was always kind of a kick around the campfire or whatever with me and my friends. And I think about it now, it's sort of like, deep breaths, kind of thing, so yeah, there's no question. And then, there's the things that I missed. There's things that I don't know what all his experiences were. I don't know what his experience was seeing his mother, fearing that because I wasn't home. Was I coming home? Was I in a ditch? So I missed some of those things, or some of those experiences that he had that I'll probably never know about, his interactions with his mom while I was during active use and that kind of stuff. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a good segue into the point that you're comfortable. Can you kind of just summarize that story of use and recovery a little bit?
Sure. So, I came into recovery through kind of a combination of criminal justice system and 12-step treatment, 12-step based treatment. My recovery has evolved quite a lot kind of from there to where I am now and how I support my recovery. But the first time I went into treatment, I was, I believe, 17. Um, I was a daily alcohol user, definitely weekly um, cocaine user as a high schooler. I screwed a lot of stuff up, but I always had good grades. I was always a pretty successful athlete. Um, I think I think it took me until I was 17 to land in treatment because of those things, right? I got away with a lot more than I maybe would have otherwise. So I had 20 through the course of high school and college, and then on to I didn't complete my master's, but I got significant way through my master's program. I think in those 6 or 7 years, I was in inpatient programs 4 or 5 times. After that, I was in four or five inpatient and outpatient programs. Um, and I never had more than 28 days sober, never once in my life. So the catalyst, I traveled a lot, I moved a lot, probably in hindsight running, but I backpacked around Europe with no money. I hitchhiked for the better part of a year. I worked on farms and did all kinds of stuff, much of which I don't remember. I'm a skier. I lived in New Zealand for a year. I got a plane ticket, and I ended up getting actually got deported from New Zealand. I overstayed. I had a 6 month work visa, and I was there about a year and a half. And again, even in New Zealand, I moved. I would make a fool of myself, do some things I was really um, ashamed of, and rather than kind of go back to my job or go, face my friends that I had injured or emotionally injured, I would be gone in the morning, kind of backpack on my back and leave. And that's really how I lived my life for a long time. It really until my son was born. So the last time, long story again, sort of long story short, 12 steps kind of taught me to focus on the solution. I don't want to tell war stories, but long story short, when I finally did kind of make a decision that I was going to change my life, I had been using drugs in an apartment. I live in Oneonta, New York, upstate. I was using drugs in an apartment here, and a young woman who I didn't know, actually, I didn't know she was in the apartment. A kid came out and he said, "Something's wrong with this girl. I think she's really drunk. I'm out of here." And we went back into the bedroom where there was a young woman who was very obviously overdosing. Nobody had naloxone or anything at the time. I was a skier and a ski instructor. So I'm trained in wilderness first aid, and basically the guy who I was buying drugs off said, "Fix her, or I'm putting you in the dumpster with her," kind of thing. They took my shoes. There's about 10 inches of snow on the ground. It's 2 or 3 in the morning, and I spent 2 hours giving her CPR. She wasn't coming around, on and off for the better part of 2 hours, and finally I picked her up. I left barefoot out of an apartment complex, and I took her to VFW, called 911 and hid under a porch while 911 picked up this woman who I didn't know. I went home and I called my dad, who I would never reach out to under any circumstances, really, at that time in my life. Made a decision that that I was going to go to treatment. That whole process was go to treatment again. That whole process was, it was kind of a nightmare. It took 2 or 3 days because I was going back and forth. No, I'm not going. Forget it. No, I'm going to kill myself. No, all of these things when we're in the midst of that kind of stressful life situation. So I made it there, and that was kind of it. I spent 28 days for the last time, and the thing that changed coming out of treatment that time was I came back to Oneonta, where my family was, and we had a recovery community and outreach center, Friends of Recovery Delaware at Seago. Amazing community center. I got out of treatment at 10, and I was in a 12-step meeting at noon, and I spent every waking minute of every day, pretty much for the first year, at the recovery center. And I got to spend time with people who had navigated the same stuff that I was trying to navigate successfully. And that's where I found my community, and it was really the key to my, where I am today. The reason I'm alive today, I think, is really because of that community-based program that was there when I needed it.
Yeah, and one of the things that came up at the event we were at is the opening of, for Tompkins County, a 24-hour access detox facility. And actually, I work for an architecture firm, and we're doing that work, which is work we're like incredibly proud of, because it's important work in the community. And that just ability for people to get access at any time is just so important, because you said at the event, like, there's also a lot of like trying to find help for you. Like, where do you go? Right? Like, there's not every
Yeah,
community has this like ease of access.
sure. I mean, the clinical based program, specifically detox. I mean, so when we look at like a lot of the work that I do now, really is advocating for these non-clinical community based programs. But the fact is, specifically with heavy alcohol use and opioid use disorder, um, detox is important. It's really dangerous to try to detox alone, or in a non-medical setting. Having access to a detox, specifically 24/7, low barrier, it's something that didn't exist. When I kind of came through sort of the system, it just didn't, right? And even finding a detox bed, even today. So I talk about barriers a lot, and we have these very real concrete barriers, and then we have perceived barriers. And the concrete barriers often look like mental health diagnoses, right? Sorry, we're a detox center, but we don't have, you have, you prescribed this mental health medication or that. We don't have the staff to give you the care that you need. So no, you can't detox in our facility, or it's healthcare or health insurance, right? You're not insured. Yeah, you're not welcome here, right? Or it's um, it might be transportation. These very real barriers that people encounter. And then we have perceived barriers, right? The barriers like, if I go, who's going to feed my cat? If I go, my ex-wife is going to take the kids full time from me. If I go, we have these barriers. And a lot of, I guess, to get back to your question, those clinical services that are low barrier, that say walk in the door, will help you, no questions asked. 3 days you'll be out of here, and we'll make sure you have a referral to an outpatient program. We'll help you get into a long-term treatment program, or we'll connect you with a community-based support, mutual aid group, whatever. Those things are so extremely important, and yeah, like I said at the event, I mean, uh, our clinical treatment system in New York State, like the rest of the country, is really antiquated. It's designed to meet the needs of the criminal justice system, especially if you have, Medicaid or Medicare. My mom had a stroke a couple of years ago. She was in a neuro rehab for the better part of 2 months. When she was able to roll her wheelchair around herself, she was able to go outside and, like, smoke a cigarette or roll around the block and get some fresh air. That's not what our treatment system looks like in New York State, right? It's very punitive. It feels very institutional, and it's scary. So while I think it's amazing that Ithaca is getting this thing that is so needed, it's important to also recognize that only about just under 11% of folks with a diagnosable substance use disorder ever get clinical treatment. So our community-based programs are really handling that other 89% of folks, right? They're coming in through church basements, they're coming into community centers, they're not engaging with clinical services, and clinical services really kind of scoop up about 82% of the funding, with prevention getting the other 18 or 20% of the funding. So these community-based programs are doing really important work with the majority of the population on almost nothing. And those clinical services they're episodic, right? Detox might be 3, 4, 5 days. Treatment might be 14 days, might be 28, might be 3 months. But the reality is, everybody that goes through those goes back to their communities, and the importance of having supportive resources in communities, I think, is really the ingredient that's often missing for people to sustain their recovery, and to create a life that's healthy, because it's really easy to come out of treatment after 28 days and pick up the phone, call your buddy.
Not to get like super like leftist or anything, but I also think our system is really set up, right? Like the American economic system requires us to have poor people, right?
You're
And
speaking my language, brother.
and
Yeah.
right. And so like, capitalism needs people in poverty. The prison economy needs people who use drugs to go to prison. I mean, it really is, it's like a really weighty system of
Yeah.
capitalism that's really designed to not help people. So like to your point, like, yeah, if you're a center and you're connected to the foundations and all that, you're getting 80% of the money, but like 518 in Ithaca is just like scrapping it together, but like is the on the street meeting place for people to get help. But the system in place that we live in America is not designed to actually want people to get better.
Absolutely not. And actually mentioned, I think at the end, so I work in a very forward facing position, and I'm the director of policy at Friends of Recovery New York, and we're primarily funded by the Office of Addiction Services and Support. Some of it's federal money, some of it's state money, but it's a really tricky position to be in because quite often I find myself, my job is to really be the voice of the needs of the recovery community. And quite often, the needs of my funder are diametrically opposed to the needs of my community. So I land in this position where, I tend to be the one in, high-profile meetings with commissioners, et cetera, who is having to say some uncomfortable things and really hold folks' feet to the fire. And I don't think that I think that the individuals that work inside that state office are incredible human beings with really uh, empathetic personalities and hearts, right? But it's the system that they're within that forces their hand to make the decisions that they make sometimes. So, yeah, I don't know. I mentioned at the end of my comments the other day that all of these things, whether it's low barrier open access centers, whether it's even community-based recovery supports being in place in communities, a robust treatment system, all of these things are really, I hate to call them band-aids, but they are downstream problems, downstream solutions for upstream problems. And those upstream problems are really, they are the fact that our the culture within our country is not taking care of people, right? That we know that addiction it's about trauma, it's about needs not having been met, it's about we can look at whether it's addiction, whether it's gun violence, whether it's education, whether it's teen pregnancy, all of these things, and like the solutions are so similar for all of those things. It's like, let's take a look at food deserts and make sure people have healthy food. Let's take a look at access to a quality education, right? Early childhood education. Let's take a look at the family structure and, how's mom supposed to work if she has kids that she needs to be home taking care of. It's about access to secondary education. It's about access to mental health care. It's about access to physical health care. So much addiction, specifically with the opioid epidemic, the really starts in doctors' offices. We see people move from the doctor's office, to the street corner. It's so we do not do a good job of taking care of the most vulnerable in our communities. And I think you're exactly right. It's addiction is symptomatic of late stage capitalism, without question.
Yeah, I was actually listening to an interview with Run the Jewels today. I don't know if you know that band. Pretty political hip hop band, and one of them was just talking about like, hell yeah, I would like do crime to feed my family.
No
Like
question.
what else do you want me to do? Like have people starve. Like, so you have a system in place that's just designed to criminalize living for a lot of people, right? And I
No
lived in
question.
inner city Chicago for a while, and now I live in a more sort of rural part of upstate New York, like 20 miles outside of Ithaca. But there's some really similar rural urban issues around poverty and food deserts and like substance abuse, right? Like I'm 51, so I'm a kid of the 80s, teenager of the 80s, right? With Just Say No and really like that super drug wars in the inner city, and no one ever talked about like rural America. And then sort of meth came along, and all of a sudden it was like, oh wait, like in opioids, it stuff's everywhere now, and not just this sort of urban issue.
No question. And I think it's important that as we talk about addiction today, that we acknowledge the drug war as being what it is. It was a racist and is a racist war on people of color and primarily. When we look at the crack epidemics of the 80s, I was born in 81. I was really a child, I guess a teen of the 90s, but that whole Just Say No lunacy, which is not based in science or fact or reality or data.
You're probably too young to remember the fried egg. This is your brain
I
on
remember.
drug.
Absolutely.
I was like,
Yeah.
this is the stupidest fucking thing I've ever seen.
Yeah, no question. But let's look at the response around the crack epidemic. It was a criminal justice response. It was a policing response. It locked up generations of human beings of color, right? And now, in the midst of the opioid epidemic, where we see middle class white kids who look like me dying, it's a public health response. And all of a sudden, harm reduction is a good thing, which, of course, harm reduction has always been a good thing.
Right.
But now we
for
see
whoever it's for.
For whoever it's for, but we see this massive public health response, which is the right response, right? Without question. But how those things are so diametrically opposed, I don't think it's a secret why. I don't think anybody with their head on straight doesn't recognize that a lot of that is about race. But again, like I think about, and there is some significant equity issues in the Black and brown community around access to treatment, access to recovery-based community-based recovery supports. But some of the solutions, again, I spend a lot of time downstate. I spend a lot of time in Buffalo and Rochester and Binghamton and Syracuse. There are folks in those communities who are buying the same package of ramen noodles from like the bodega or corner store that in way up in northern New York are feeding their family with that package of ramen from Dollar General, right? Because that's what's there, and there's not a single fruit and vegetable for miles. So
right,
I
also
agree with
super
you.
predatory business.
Absolutely, yeah. So there's no question that some of these things are while there's severe equity issues in those communities, there's also some of these, like I said, some of these solutions are the same, right? It's about poverty. It's about meeting people's needs. And addiction is about needs not being met, right? So, yeah, agree 100%.
Yeah. So what's like one thing, maybe there's not one, but is there any like one thing you feel really supports your sobriety?
So it's not so like I talk about paths of recovery, and like sort of paths to recovery. And like I said, my path to recovery was really through it was through the criminal justice system. I have DWIs. I have like these like arrests, and so that and fear of the criminal justice system is part of my pathway too. My pathway of recovery started in 12-step rooms, AA and NA, but it's evolved into something that my first sponsor would probably say is unhealthy. My job has been an incredible sort of driver of my wellness, right? Like I learned about service in a 12-step room. And today I consider a lot of the work that I do to be of service and completely integral with my recovery. And I know that sometimes we hear like those things, your recovery should be your own and don't place your recovery over here. You know what I mean? But the work that I do, I started out as a peer professional, recovery coach, and a certified recovery peer advocate. And then I went on to be an outreach coordinator where I was engaging with businesses. And then we started integrating peer services. These are non-clinical, really recovery coaching supports into the shelters in Oneonta, domestic violence shelter, the housing shelter, into the emergency department here. And we started doing these really creative, integrating peers in these really creative ways into the community. And then I went on to oversee our Friends of Recovery New York in Albany, our statewide youth program, uh, serving like, in the neighborhood of 1,000 kids a month, which was amazing. And here I am, I landed years later doing this, like what I feel like is, it's kind of my dream job. And my, we talk about community, the antidote to addiction is connection and all these things, and I spend all day every day inside this incredibly robust and supportive and hopeful recovery community. Everybody I interact with, right, is in recovery, is an amazing ally of recovery. Like, so I really credit my work with as being kind of like the thing that keeps my recovery focused in my own life. But I still go, I catch meetings, not enough. I say I like to exercise. I don't exercise enough. I love to ski. It's my son and I, we ski every weekend in the winter. We ride mountain bikes. So there's a physical fitness piece that I think is, for me, really important. I like to preach mindfulness, like in early recovery, it was really helpful to me. Yoga and meditation was really helpful. And I find myself moving away from some of those things that were
yes, same. I like really explored a lot of Buddhism, and now, because for me on the daily, like I really don't think about it. It's been almost 13 years, and I really I wake up and I'm like, I don't have an interest in drinking. I just don't. But which is one of the reasons I feel like I spoke at that event, right? Like, I'm a professional person. I built a career. I've served on nonprofit boards. Like, I was there with like 3 of my 4 kids, right? Like, there is a light at the end of the tunnel, right? It might be far and it might be dim, but I believe it's always there. And so for people like me that have sort of really found success and long term, it's like my job to like shed light on the dark. Because I think addiction, right? It's just, there's shame, right? There's shame involved in that. And so if we can stand up and just say, like, look, it's a little bit like shit happens, but here I am. I have a family. I've found my way through, and like, you can too.
Yeah, and I think that's so important because especially like coming out of the 80s and the 90s, like there was all of that stigma and those commercials, the egg in the frying pan commercials did nothing but further stigmatize substance use, period. The reality, like now we're finally starting to see some data. We're finding that there's actually people researching the brain chemistry behind like addiction and what happens during recovery. And we're learning that the majority of people who at some point in their life or another have a diagnosable SUD or experience chaotic substance use get well. The majority of people get well, right? And that's not the perception that the media and even the medical professions have kind of portrayed, right? Or the government's portrayed. It's portrayed the egg in the frying pan, right? Like once the egg's broken, it never goes back in the shell. We have amazing brain scan data from all kinds of different sources that actually show the brain repairs itself, right? They actually show that new pathways are established, that people do, not only do we get well emotionally and we get better physically, but our brains recover also, right? So it's incredibly important that we acknowledge that, and that people like you and me, whether we're coming from a 12-step, old school 12-step group in a church basement that says, don't tell anybody, we're anonymous for a reason, or not, it's important that I think that we have an ethical responsibility to share our stories so that we can kind of slowly start to change that narrative. Like, hey, this person I love has a problem, but recovery is possible,
And especially this sort of connects back to sort of that threat of capitalism. And like, so my daughter had an eating disorder, which she's really, done amazing with and really, has long-term recovery from, but we had resources to help her, right? Like when we went to the doctor and they were like, hey, we pull out like all the stops, right? Group treatment, found the therapist in Ithaca who literally wrote the book on adolescent eating disorder, right? So like we had resources. We could have kept it like nestled within our little family. right? But if you drive around, you get one perception of addiction and substance abuse. And, I would argue that's the minority. It's just what people see, because people with resources, whether they're in recovery or not, can kind of just keep it on the down low.
Sure. Yeah, no question. Or, sometimes I feel like when we have, it's even more important to us to protect, like, so if you're from a family that, kind of a public facing family in the community, it becomes even more insidious, right? Because like it ends up not getting addressed at all, right? Because we don't want somebody labeled an addict in our family, or we don't, you know what I mean? And it becomes this thing that really sort of grows exponentially in the dark. You know what I mean? And so I agree. I think there's all kinds of power in sharing our story. I'm a registered lobbyist with the state of New York, which is bizarre to me.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, is that just like real weird? Because people talk about perceptions that people have of jobs.
Yeah, right? No question. It is totally weird, but we don't have any money, right? So like our stories are our capital, right? So like my job is finding those people, including myself, who are willing to sit down with our legislators and sit down with legislative staff and sit down with school boards or whoever and talk about our stories, right? In a way that moves people, and you were talking about capitalism and sort of the structure of how things get done in Albany and in Washington, and it revolves around money, right? So part of my job is like trying to find people like you who know the value in sharing their story of hope and putting you guys on a pedestal and saying, hey, this is what recovery looks like when we have the resources to help people recover. And quite often it comes, again, data, right? Like it comes back to quite often, unfortunately, my message is, you know what? I'm cheaper when I'm well.
Yeah.
I'm cheaper when I'm well. I'm expensive when I'm in active use. I'm an expensive community member. It's expensive to incarcerate me. It's expensive to hospitalize me. You might get robbed by me, right? So like I am it's cheaper to make sure that we have the services that we need than it is not to. And it's a real drag that we have to take the value of the human out of it and make it an argument about economics. But that's quite often what moves people in Albany, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Ben. This was awesome, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk.
Yeah, it was great, Stephen. I hope we get to chat again. I'll probably, like I said, a lot of my job is finding folks like you who are willing to share their stories. So I may give you the old tap on the shoulder before too long.
Anytime, I would be glad to do it.
Well, that's great, and it was nice to meet you. Nice to chat with you.
Thanks for listening. For more information, for links to any music or books we talked about, or to buy some Sober Dad Crew merchandise, please visit soberdadcrew.com.